My name is Jim Turk, and I'm the director of the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University. On behalf of the Center and tonight's event's co-sponsors, the Ryerson School of Performance, the Toronto Public Library, and the Vancouver Public Library, I want to welcome you to the first in our new series of virtual programs, the Center for Free Expression and Conversation. It features prominent guests discussing issues important in the current political moment, in which democracy is under threat, public discourse on vital matters is fragmented into self-affirming ideological bubbles, and censorship is increasingly seen as an ally of social justice. It is especially important and exciting and an honor that our new series is being launched by a conversation with Iqbal Khan, the distinguished and innovative British theatre director, whose productions of Othello, Tartuffe, Antony and Cleopatra, amongst others, at the Royal Shakespeare Company at Stratford-upon-Avon, along with other productions at Shakespeare's Globe in London, the National Theatre in the West, National Theatre, theaters in the West End, and with Box Clever, a remarkable writer-led theatre company dedicated to the creation of contemporary theatre for young people, and his work at other theaters across Britain, in Paris, Japan, and the United States. Iqbal has worked extensively in drama schools in the UK, has had residencies and delivered lectures at various American universities, and most recently was the Michael Douglas Visiting Artist at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Iqbal's unique life experience has brought him to a place where he represents the nexus of what we're trying to explore with these conversations. Welcome, Iqbal.
Thanks, Jim.
Today, he will be discussing Beyond Conflict, Theater and the Art of Embracing Controversy or Dissonance, with Robin Sokoloski, the Executive Director of the Playwrights Guild of Canada. Welcome, Robin.
Hi.
As the conversation with Iqbal unfolds, Robin will turn to the audience for a Q&A with Iqbal. For those of you listening, if you have a question at any time, please click on the Q&A tab at the bottom center of the screen to write your question. Ange Holmes, the center's coordinator, will be monitoring the questions, and when Robin turns to questions, Ange will share the questions that have been, that you've written to discuss with Iqbal. Now it's time to hear from our guests, and we look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Jim. How are you, Iqbal?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much.
Evening there, so, and just about to become evening here. So thank you for joining us across the pond.
It's my pleasure, thank you.
I thought I would dive right into the thing that's on everybody's mind at the moment, the pandemic. And I know, working within the theater sector, that it's really weighing on a lot of theater companies and theater creators. There's this great deal of pressure I'm feeling that in order to survive, that I guess my fear is that artistic decisions will be made that lean towards what is more popular than rather than what's risky or controversial. Is that something you're fearing as well? Is that something you've always felt? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something I've always felt, and I think actually this moment is an opportunity to sort of challenge that paradigm. I don't think that, I've never felt that there's necessarily a contradiction between what's popular and what's complex. I mean, I think Shakespeare's plays were very, very popular and were for the generality of mankind. But they were also able to be very popular and to speak to every member of society. The kind of relatively elitist tag that is connected to serious, quotes, serious work or complex work, I think is probably more an index of the way performances are priced more than anything else. No, but as I say, I think I always feel whatever I make, whatever kind of work I make, I want to ensure that it's also popular, that it speaks to as many different communities as possible. However, I think the point, to address, I think the point that you're trying to make or suggesting is that there's an opportunity now, I think, to ask really serious questions about why we do what we do, to reevaluate, to reset, to challenge the assumptions that we've been living with for too long. I mean, I think there is a lot of complacency around who does the work that we see, what are the stories that we tell, what are the experiences that we explore, and critically, what are the forms that we use or embrace. And I think, I hope that well, what I feel at the moment is that there is an ache for us to get back into rooms and to share our stories with each other. So I don't feel nervous about that. And I think there's an opportunity, because there is this ache, there is this real passion to be in those rooms again, an opportunity to share maybe more complex experiences. I think everybody, when they come to sharing those rooms again, are going to want to not just escape the complexity that they're coming out of, but also maybe to find some way of understanding the difficulties maybe that they've been through, or the tensions or the dissonances of their lives. So as I say, I think it's a unique opportunity to explore that.
So how do you view the play as a medium set apart from any other artistic medium, special to, I guess, delve into those complexities and explore them?
Well, I mean, the live event is an ephemeral thing. It happens there in the room with those people. Now, you might have a published script that you can then go back to and read afterwards, but the actual theatre experience is not just the performance created by the actors on stage and the creatives who've created the three dimensions of the experience, but it's also that audience on that night. And that's something that is absolutely unique to the moment. The dynamics of it are absolutely unique. I think that's very exciting. And I think people are, there's also the sense of the event that surrounds a night out at the theatre, as it were. You're not quite sure what you're going to get. I think there is an ache to be surprised, to be informed, yes, entertained, of course. I mean, there is an element of delight to that people are looking for. But I think also people do come to the theatre and sit in darkened rooms to share with others in those darkened rooms new experiences. And I think that they trust, as a part of that contract, us to take them with compassion to places that might be rather difficult or uncertain for them in normal life. So I feel that responsibility to sort of protect an audience, as it were, but also to challenge them in those moments.
I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into that contract you're talking about between theater and the audience. Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I mean, there are ways and ways of trailing what an audience will come and see. So if they come to see a production of Shakespeare and it's a relatively theatre literate audience, they'll come because they like the play. They think they know, let's say, what Hamlet is about, and they want to hear the wonderful text again. But I think also even that conservative audience will want to come and be surprised by the play again. They'll come and want it to be refreshed for them in some sort of way. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are experiences, new plays, or new performances that are genre challenging, as it were. They're a fusion of different kinds of forms, where the audience are coming to, I think, to embrace difference, to maybe understand the other, to walk in other people's shoes, to get a sense of the textures of the lives of others. I'm sure also that what they'll be looking for is in some way to either have their experiences reinforced, or to have some kind of investigation of the things that have concerned them. And all of these range of experiences are available to audiences, and I think people go to the theatre for very different reasons, and I think all of these experiences are available, whether you're doing an old play or a new play, or a play that defies explicit genre definitions. So I think the contract is. I remember that Neil Gaiman talking about storytelling. And he had this wonderful metaphor of taking his readers by the hand gently into the depths of the wood. And then when they were at the center of this dark wood, he would gently let their hands go and allow them to find their way back. Now, I think that first bit of the journey, the quality of the way we take an audience's hand, how deep we take them into the wood, as it were, I think all of that is a part of the contract that we have a responsibility to honor. And that audiences, I think, enjoy taking that journey and engaging in that contract with us.
I want to delve into that idea of the other, and this, and get into a little bit discussion talking about the authentic voice. I feel like there's constant pressure within the art sector, at least here in Canada. It's very highly competitive for audiences, for funding dollars, sponsorship dollars. And in order to qualify, I feel like there's a tendency to lose that otherness by having to abide by a certain process. And yet society leans on the arts to free us from our insular thinking. So I was just wondering, what can we do within the sector to ensure that there are different perspectives given center stage? And so we're not always reinforcing the status quo.
What can we do? Well, first of all, I think the thing that we can do is honor our uniqueness, our plurality. And I think, of course, I have a more, in terms of the as it were, the privileged tradition of people who've done this kind of work in theatre, that they have a certain profile. And so I immediately appear like someone who is in a very facile way defined as an other. And my otherness is necessarily interesting because people like me don't normally do this sort of work. And I think that's absolutely fine, and it's true. But I think what that also minimizes is the fact that, all those sort of maybe, let me be crude for a second, but sort of white middle class men who have had the lion's share of this sort of work in the past, they are also highly complex. Their identities are incredibly complex, and they have a plurality of experiences that they are mining when they create the work. And I think that's what we do when we create art, is we speak out of our complexity. We speak out of our experience. And I think so long as we are generously making work that comes out of that exploration, and in my case, obviously I'm in charge of rooms where I have many others in that room, and I am trying to allow their individual complexity into the sorts of stories we're telling and the ways we're telling those stories. We are necessarily going to create something that comes out of a hybridity and a complexity, and wherever we end up, as it were, that's a very, very rich ground to create out of. It's not always easy, because I think a lot of people who come into our profession, as you say, this word, this very problematic word, qualifying. I mean, I think I've been challenged with that all my life. I've loved theatre since I was very, very young. When I was very young, I was also very poor, and so I couldn't go and see live theatre, but I would see great things on screens and on TV. And nobody looked like me, but they were doing the work that I loved, and they were doing it in a way that I felt was inscribed with a certain authority. And so when I was thinking about doing it myself and thinking about what was most powerful about it, I would always, as it were, ape those authoritative tropes that had defined the experience for me. And therefore, whenever I had my initial opportunities in this profession, I felt a pressure to live up to those tropes, to be as good as they were, to be as skilled as in my craft as I understood them to be. And it took a while for me to realize, well, there are the other bits of me that I've never seen. The kind of a music that I bring that I have not heard in these pieces, and that is valuable. That takes quite a long time to celebrate, because it's not validated in the profession more or it hasn't been. It certainly wasn't when I first came into the industry. I think in theory, people understand that we need to be much more welcoming, as it were, of difference now in our profession. But to change those systems, you need to have people skilled in valuing those things and encouraging the freedom of the voice of others, as it were. The way they play their instruments, as it were, or their instrument is valuable. And how do you ensure that they are playing freely before you start to edit and comment? Those are very complex things, and I think it'll take a while for us to sort of challenge and adjust our systems and the people who, the gatekeepers, as it were, to change the ways in which we make work, not just who makes that work.
Yeah, there's certainly a hunger here in the Canadian theatre sector for other voices to be present on stage, and but yeah, I think it's a long road. Is there shifts you're seeing in theatre institutions, ones who are making way, and if so, how?
Well, yeah, I am. I'm seeing that they are more prepared to risk. However, they're still defining it as risk, which I think is really problematic. And it's not problematic in the sense that, of course, it's a risk for them, because they're giving jobs to people who about whom they know very little in terms of their output, and they're giving them great opportunities, and so they're not sure what the output is going to be. However, the more problematic idea of risk is to do with the economic risk. Is there is a perception that work made by others, as it were, kind of allowing people from more diverse backgrounds into the industry, is going to limit the audiences that come to see this, because the audiences have an expectation of certain kinds of work. And I profoundly disagree with this paradigm of risk that's attached to the opening out of the sorts of representations we have in our work. It is absolutely not a risk if the people have demonstrated their skill and quality. If people don't have craft, and you're giving them opportunities that are in essence beyond their capabilities, then I think that was the case maybe 10 years ago, where maybe the pool of artists was shallower, particularly in theatre here, in the South Asian sector. I think it was much broader in the Black sector. But I think now there are there's an abundance of talent, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's any poverty of craft in those people. Quite the opposite. And I think so long as audiences, because I think when you have audiences that maybe resist that change, they resist it because they're afraid that the people making it don't love the work. So let me be explicit. So let's say you have a production of Othello, a Shakespeare play, any Shakespeare play, and it's done by a director or with a company that is in opposition to the traditional kind of profiles of the people that make that work. You will have a subset, maybe quite a large subset of traditional audience goers who will resist that experience or be fearful of that experience because they will feel that those people are appropriating the material and they don't love Shakespeare. That they're kind of dumbing it down, or they're reducing the complexity of the language, and they're kind of rapping it as if rap is a kind of redundant, reductive form, and actually, I think if they're turning up and they see it, and I hope they would see from anything that I did, that actually every radical innovation or otherwise that I might do with the piece is born out of a love for it, and is born out of an engagement with the beauty of the work. Then actually, I think I found that those audiences that might have been wary come out with their completely opposite feeling. They are thrilled that the work speaks to a much broader audiences and will continue to live beyond the narrow traditional audiences.
So is the prerequisite for telling or retelling a story that may not necessarily belong to the person telling the story, is it simply just because the person telling it loves the story, as you say, it's born out of love?
Yes, I mean, I remember when I started, as it were, acting and directing at university, and I started by auditioning for a production of Twelfth Night because I loved the play, and I got the part of the priest. So I had a lot of time listening to what was going on in the room, and I loved it, absolutely loved it, and out of somewhere, I proposed for their next production, a production of Pinter's The Homecoming, and I wanted to direct it. Now, I had never directed a play in my life before that point, and the only qualification I had was that I thought I was perhaps the person who was the most passionate in the room about doing the play, and that I would acquire whatever information I needed to acquire, and I was excited about it. And I still think that is a key quality in the way I engage with my work and how I define the roots of my engagement with the work, is that it comes out of a love for the work and a generous desire to embrace and engage an audience that might be very different to me, and to try and communicate to them our shared sense of why this work is important, how it speaks to the world now, and why it should continue to sit on those shelves for the next 450 years.
You tend to work with quite a bit of Shakespeare, and what is it that you feel that's why is it so timeless, and how are you making it new?
I mean, I have recently done quite a lot of Shakespeare, but I actually I've always done it. But I've also done quite a lot of work with young people and new plays, and I'd say that I love opera more than anything else as a form. And I think the reason why I love all of this stuff is because I think it's the perfect marriage of the Dionysian and the Apollonian. It's the animal that dreams. It's I love the blood pumping thrill of these pieces, as well as their ability to soar, to be transcendent. And I mean, Shakespeare is maybe the premier example of somebody whose dramaturgical structure embraces so many different registers of performance, from the improvised stand-up comedian in the middle of Macbeth who starts making jokes about taking a piss and not being able to get it up because he's drunk, at the same moment at which the universe is being turned upside down and the king is being murdered off stage, and we have perhaps the greatest poet in Shakespeare, Macbeth, but also maybe the greatest serial murderer in Macbeth, in Shakespeare, in Macbeth. And these sort of complexities of and range of registers are thrilling to me. They're very messy plays, and because they are, I think they constantly surprise in their movement, and excite, because it never stays in the groove. It continually shocks and surprises us. So yeah, no, I find that thrilling. It's not easy to do, but it's extraordinary. And I mean, and I think it's the sort of work that always works best performed. Yeah, I mean, it's great literature, but it's better performance literature, I would suggest.
I would agree. You mentioned working with young audiences. How do you, and I think it's really important as we're speaking about theater and how its way of sharing important and necessary messages. How do you enlist your young audiences and get an active response from them on what you're trying to explore in your work?
Very good question. The reason why I continue every single year, I mean, no matter whether I've worked the national or with the RSC at that sort of exalted, privileged platform, I always ensure that every single year there's a significant amount of my work that's done with young people, because I always begin in that work by not assuming that what I'm doing means anything to them. A big part of it is for me to understand why they should care. And I'm led by them, by their engagement with the material. I try and find ways in for them, things that might connect to them, the sound of the language, the muscularity of it, the physicality of it. I don't begin with the complexity. I begin, as it were, with the music of it and the viscerality of it. But there is so much in engaging with young people, where they are particularly younger young people. So people maybe who are sort of 8, 9, 10, etc. And I've done this when I've done workshops with them with opera as well, where they have not yet understood that they are not. That certain work is off limits to them. They haven't been excluded, as it were, from any kind of experience. And I try and get to the place with them in my first encounter with them, of a kind of an innocent engagement with the punch of these things. So and I always find that if I talk less, listen more, and maybe perform a little bit, or show them performances of it, that I allow them into their experience. I mean, even if they find certain things alienating, and there are lots of, quotes, great performances of things that people share with young people that they find incredibly alienating, but that isn't the work. That's the way it's performed. And so I try and understand, what is it about the way it's performed that is alienating to them, and try and find maybe ways of doing it that will speak to them. And I don't assume that they necessarily have any less of a desire to engage with complexity. Or, I mean, you look at the kinds of extraordinary music that they're listening to, or the range of techniques in film and TV now that they're engaging with. They are more than capable of engaging with the seriousness and the difficulty of this, and I profoundly believe that young people, particularly young people, are very excited about engaging with challenge if it's done generously and honestly. If they're not being talked down to or policed, if your engagement with them is, as I say, born out of love and a desire for you to understand as you're introducing them to things, how they change the thing that you're introducing them to.
So what are the truths that theater contain that interest you or you're curious about
right now? Oh God, so many. But right now, I love the idea that in a great play, that they don't provide solutions. That you often, when we are making the piece for an audience, I mean, there will be directors and creative teams that, in a sense, do a three-dimensional essay and communicate a view of the world through the play. I'm not interested in doing that because I'm more interested in the audience leaving the theatre and really engaging in the open questions that have been presented to them. The most important thing for me about theatre is that you, in its simplest form, is that you're person A walking onto stage, encountering a person B, and they think person A thinks he's in a scene that's about let's say an event D, and person B thinks that it's about an event F, and then they realize that they're in a scene that's about something completely other than what they thought it was. Now, for me, that's the perfect model of what we do in life all the time. And there is a joy in encountering the unknown, because it's when we genuinely encounter the unknown that we grow, rather than just reinforce our existing paradigms. And for me, there's nothing more important at the moment than in trying to kind of release the joy and engaging with the unknown, and engaging with oppositional positions. Yeah.
I remember reading or seeing something that you had said where it's in uncertainty where the truth comes out, and that's where the exciting aspect of creating art lives. I find that so profound, but I was wondering if you could dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, that uncertainty, I think is mine as much as anyone else's. It's not just me trying to create a puzzle for an audience. It's embedded in my engagement with the material. So let's say I'm asked to do a play that I've directed before. So I directed Uncle Vanya, and I was in Uncle Vanya, stupidly. Played him when I was 26, 7. Great play, extraordinary play. Loved it, but I'm sure it was awful. Now, and I've engaged with many performances since then. So I think I have a knowledge of an engagement with the material. But if I was asked to do it again, I would actively engage in trying to forget everything that I knew. I mean, I would do my research. I would do all the research I could, just because I'm excited, I'm interested. I want to discover its performance history. I want to have my own kind of visceral engagement with the material again. But once I've done all of that, and obviously you need to have a sense of where you're going to begin with something. Like, why are you doing it now? That's the biggest question for me, is why am I doing this play now and for whom? But once I get into the room with the actors, it's very important for me to put all that aside and to be surprised, because it all the most interesting stuff, the most humane stuff that I will discover, that we will discover, will come out of that engagement with the surprising perspective. And actually, this also goes to my engagement with my creative team, so my designers. I'm very keen not to over brief my collaborators, because I'm very, very interested in hearing what their responses are, because I want to be surprised, I want to be informed, but because ultimately I'm trying to create a work for hundreds, maybe thousands of people who are nothing like me, and I can only do that if I am informed by as broad an array of perspectives in the making of it as I can be. I mean, I remember also very recently, Akram Khan, the choreographer and great dancer, was talking about gatekeepers, and about how difficult it seems to be for them to listen to, or to shift their systems. And he defined listening as only starting when you truly stop waiting to speak. Which I think is profound. How often, when we are engaged with others, are we constructing our response as we're listening? And therefore, how much are we missing? And I love doing the opposite of that. I love surrendering to the ideas of others, because I always feel my improvised response that comes out of that will be much more exciting, hopefully to them, but definitely to me.
That must be such a challenge right now for you. It sounds like you're very dependent on the co-creation of theater making to bring something into fruition. And right now it's just not possible. And there's this potential new way of doing theater on the horizon using something like Zoom. How will that affect the work and coming at the story in the work for you?
I don't think it's a potential. I mean, I think these sorts of engagements with this technology will develop new ways of doing this. I hope, and I don't think it will replace what we've done. I mean, unfortunately, I think you're absolutely right, though, that we are going to have to pause and hope that the world comes back to us sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, there is this other way of engaging with each other, which is interesting. I mean, it's more fractured. We're not sure when to take our cues. The paralinguistic things that we are reading from others, which normally makes up so much of our understanding of what people are saying, not just their words, is limited. So I mean, I have the sense that Zoom exhausts people, because the quality of attention required is enormous. But that's no bad thing. I think it's about time that they engaged in that intensity of engagement. So I think we'll I'm sure we'll find lots of very exciting, and I've already seen very exciting work. But ultimately, sharing the space with others is at the root of what we do in theatre. And I'm sure there'll be other forms of engagement that will come out of this. But I don't think that will replace the primacy of sharing a space with another human being, bodily. And we engage with the words, the embodied words, in a completely different way. And it's absolutely key to our humanity, I think.
So what is it that you're personally missing about live theater at the moment?
What am I personally missing about it? I'm missing being in a room and not knowing, and going on a journey to try and collectively make sense of something, to create something for other people that we hope is valuable. I'm missing the presence of other people, a collection of people who don't know and who are genuinely going on a journey to discover something together, and where there isn't the desire to win, there is only the desire to learn, where ideological differences are the source of richness in the sort of conclusions that you might, and where everything is provisional. Because for me, that is the truth of things, is that all our understandings of things, our priorities, our ideological positions, it's all provisional, and it should be. And that's the joy of living. I mean, I can only engage in that now with the literature that I read, or certain things I see on television, etc. But that's all. I'm motivating that myself. You know, I'm either engaging with dead people or virtual people. But the challenge of the other is lessened when they're not sharing the room with you.
Mm. I thought maybe while we open it up for questions that I could ask you to take a moment to celebrate those who are taking risks and making the commitment needed to ensure that stories that need to be told are being told. So who comes to mind when I ask that particular question?
Oh, I mean, I'm sorry, but when you said to celebrate people that are taking risks, I didn't think about the arts at all. I thought about people that were taking risks with their lives and are being creative in the way that they're trying to help. So, I mean, obviously my mind is dominated with gratitude and respect for those people. In terms of the arts, it's extraordinary to me how resilient and playful the arts community remains. I mean, yes, it's angry. I think it's very frustrated by the fact that there are only instrumental conversations happening about how we come out of this. That the conversations about support are really essentially to do with money, rather than serious conversations about what is the nature of the contribution the arts have to society, to our the mental well-being of others, and I think there's a lot of frustration that these conversations aren't happening enough. However, so many freelance artists are creating spaces where they can have these conversations, and I think are engaging incredibly creatively, persuasively, and with enormous generous articulacy with people in power, as it were, with the gatekeepers. I think it's remarkable that, and you know, I mean, there are people here. I mean, there are extraordinary gatekeepers here. People like Daniel Evans, maybe, who Nick Heitner, people who run big institutions who are refusing to stop the conversation, as it were, or are trying to find platforms for people to come and join in. But I mean, I say those big names, but there are countless numbers of freelancers who are creating forums and platforms for them to share work. It's happening all the time, and it's overwhelming. I mean, just to be personal for a second, my wife's also a theatre director, and she has been helping out at a food bank near here, and she's encountered enormous sort of mental health issues with the people that are forced to get that kind of support, and so she's created a series of workshops for people struggling to engage with storytelling workshops, and she's made the funding application. She's got the money. She's got the artists to help run those sessions, and I think people like that are extraordinary and should be celebrated.
Yeah, for a split second there in March when everything happened, I was just so in awe with how everything suddenly shifted to this view, the social aspect of society, and just art coming out of the woodwork. And then it went back to the economic conversation. But for a split second, the arts were of great value. And I'm going to hold on to that and be optimistic as we go forward and have a continue believing, as the arts lover that I am, that
I think, sorry, Robin, forgive me for talking over you, but it's not just the pandemic, it's the BLM movement, it's what's going on in America at the moment, and ideologically in many parts of the world, there is a real pressure to engage with what is the nature of community? What are the natures of our contracts with others? Is there anything such as a quote pure country with a pure heritage? Aren't we all, in some senses, constructed out of? Aren't countries and borders basically don't they all fence in some degree of immigrant experience? And isn't that complexity, that hybridity, what makes our communities so rich? And so I think those conversations are happening. There's enormous tension at the moment because it feels like there are communities who have been silenced up to now, and they are taking those platforms with great vehemence. But I think these are necessary conversations, and I think ultimately can only lead to better outcomes. I'm not suggesting it will be easy, but I think we need to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I hope many of those conversations take place on the stage in front of a live audience. And I guess we should move over to questions. Should I turn it over to you?
Sure, yeah, I can give you the first question. So the first question is from Ivor, and Ivor says, Iqbal said to be sure, why am I doing this play now? What's his answer for doing a play like Othello or Merchant of Venice? How do you make peace with the risk that one of these plays will cause marginalized people more pain than is justified by any new thoughts your production can provoke?
It's really good question. I think if I was doing a piece that I thought would ultimately create more hurt than the consolation it might provide, I wouldn't be doing it. That's not to say that I wouldn't engage with pieces that dramatized hurt, because I think that's a part of what we need to do. I think it's very important to kind of to engage with histories of trauma. And not to pretend or to erase that. And I would say that my ambition would be to maybe dramatize not just cruelty and oppression, but also the courage and the ambition of human beings to overcome those things, and to for ways of people of living with each other, or the possibility of living with each other in compassion, through compassion. I mean, I think it's a very good question.
Okay. Hi, the next question that we have is from Lenny, and Lenny says, we are in a difficult time where the public is deeply polarized, where social media largely reinforces our divisions. How can theater help overcome that division and foster broader public discourse and engagement across political, social, and cultural divides?
Great question. I think that's. I don't think that's a how. I think that's what theatre does. I mean, a bad play will basically be a soapbox for a certain set of ideas. Any good or great play is the dramatizing of the collisions of different perspectives, of different paradigms of thoughts. So I think if you come to share a space with others who might have different experiences to you, and you see experiences on stage that are maybe in opposition to yours, or ideologies that are in opposition to yours, you should also, I would imagine, see things that are maybe more cognizant with those ideas you brought in, and to see that dramatized on the stage, as it were, to see. I mean, I suppose it's a kind of crude definition of tragedy, isn't it? Is that there are those that die on stage so that they don't die off stage. They don't die in real life. So we learn from the awful truths of sometimes that theatre dramatizes. Theatre is also uniquely articulate. It's the realm of the word and the realm of argument. And we don't have very many platforms where ideas collide in the way, through language, in the way they do in theatre. And great theatre engages with you emotionally first, and then enables you to engage with the ideas. So it's an exciting collision of opposing forces and ideas. And I think all of those things are tremendously important for us. The other thing is, I suppose, as well, is to see people on stage and to have dramatized experiences of qualities of existence or communities that you have no knowledge of, and to kind of to come out informed and celebrating people who are different to you, who have organized their societies differently to you, but maybe share very important things. And I think knowing that is again a very welcome thing for the world right now, is that maybe we don't need to entrench. Maybe we don't need to build walls higher. Maybe the opposite is a more valuable way forwards. And I think theatre does all of that.
Which is why it's become increasingly important, given, I think, this time where people are watching very like-minded things over and over and over again, and they're trained to do that. There's algorithms that have us catering towards like versus like versus like versus like. I'm always wondering how theater can act as a player to kind of charge through that barrier of this way of polarization that we're living in. Exactly. What can theater do?
Well, I mean, I think if you, I think it's all about. I mean, how do you persuade people to attend the theatre? I think that's the thing. Once they're in the theatre, I think it does all of those things. I think it challenges binary truths. I think it celebrates difference. I think it, and you know, you see, once you're in the space, I think that it does all of those things, and it does it joyfully. It does it in a celebratory way, etc. But the difficulty is when theatre feels like an alienating environment, like where people won't buy the ticket because they feel that what they will see in there might in some way disturb them, upset them, and that they can't leave the theatre in the way they can leave a bad film. That in some way sharing a space with real people feels more intimidating. And there's lots, I think, that we can do in terms of breaking down those barriers. I mean, you know, there are communities who traditionally don't feel theatre is for them. You know, the Asian community here, maybe certain sort of communities of colour maybe have felt that traditional theatre buildings aren't for them. And we can, I mean, Hamilton explodes that. the musical. It sort of says that actually this we can tell old stories with new people. We can it can be joyful, it can be articulate, it can be fun and playful and moving, and everyone's allowed to see it, and everyone will take something different from it. Yeah.
Yeah, Hamilton certainly found a way of accomplishing that and created some type of formula to really relay an important message, I think.
Yeah.
And I feel there's lots of similarities between that particular piece and a lot of the work that you do by modernizing, for lack of a better word, Shakespeare and bringing it to young people. And for me, that's what I think is the key. If you can have young people, bring young people into a theater and expose them to it at a young age, then that potentially is what clicks. That's certainly, from my own personal experience, what worked for me. It's because I was exposed to the arts at a very young age. So you take it with you. And so the importance of having, bringing theater to young people is, I think, absolutely essential.
I think it's absolutely profoundly important. The arts provision in education is actually even more important than what the gatekeepers are doing in the theatres. And it's been significantly reduced in this country, and that worries me enormously, because as you say, when you are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, you don't know that you shouldn't like classical music or opera or rap music, or and they all have a similar degree of complexity and articulacy, and exposing young people to all of these things is absolutely essential, not to educate them to enjoy theatre, but to enrich their experiences as human beings. It's absolutely central. And thank you for saying that. That Hamilton it sort of resembles the sort of work I do. I mean, extraordinary. But I mean, the thing is, he's created work there that's born out of a profound love of language, and a love of complexity, and a love of form. And I think all of those things are very, very important to me.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about language and the importance of it to make theater feel more accessible, and how and what you think about when you're working with language, especially Shakespearean, and how you make that accessible.
Well, it's one of those things that I think I more and more. Okay, so can I just take it? I'll take it back one step, because I think this is related to the way we construct our rehearsal rooms. So there's a shared ambition, I think, in the arts, that we should increase or embrace representation, a broader representation of artists involved in making the work. And so what often happens is you'll get a fantastically diverse range of people in your rehearsal rooms, with fantastically diverse experiences. And say, for instance, if you're doing Shakespeare, there will be a sense in some of those fantastic actors that they are, what's the word? They lack an authenticity, in terms of their expertise with the language, because they will have a sense, an inherited sense, of what the authoritative voice is. So one of the biggest things for me at the beginning of a process is to find ways of ensuring that I challenge all the hierarchies in the room, that I give space to all to contribute, to voice their opinions on things. And there's a fantastically elegant exercise that Peter Gill, a great director, teacher, and playwright used to do. He would take up a text, take out all the punctuation, and print it up, and then every person in the circle, as it were, of the ensemble would have a copy of this text turned over, and then as we move around, they would turn the page over and they would start reading. And the minute we decided that that person stopped making sense, we would say, and then that person would turn their page over, and then the next person would turn their page over and start reading. And again, the minute they stopped making sense, we would stop. Now the point about that exercise is that text could be anything. It could be Dickens, it could be Shakespeare, it could be Tupac, it could be Virginia Woolf, it could be whoever. And our only index of a judgment is sense. Beyond that, there's nothing else. And we are only using our listening. And what's extraordinary is that there will be people around that circle who, if I did the first page of Little Dorrit, Dickens' novel, would be overwhelmed by it normally, but by the time they've heard it a number of times, they can punctuate it with ease and clarity, and in their own rhythms, and they can make complete sense of it, and the fear is removed. And what you've done is you've released their rhythms, their music into this sort of material. So things like this are very, very important to me in finding ways of liberating people's relationships to language, or different kinds of language. Because for me, I mean, that's what excites me most about language, is not what it does for me, but what it does for others, how it detonates in the bodies of others. That's what excites me most, and I can. I mean, I love reading out loud, and I love sharing stories with people, but I can just as easily sit quietly and enjoy others. And I think maybe that comes out of my background, my childhood, because I grew up with a Pakistani immigrant family who, most of them were illiterate, but they were great storytellers. And they would tell stories into the early hours. And so I did a lot of listening when I was younger, to very, very articulate people, but not literate people, you know. And it's separating these sorts of things.
I think there's a couple more questions, so I won't take all your time. And Ange, I guess you could read off the next one.
Okay, yeah, we have a question from Nick here. Nick says, you mentioned how much you like working with young people.
Yeah.
And some of these instances, you've been very bold. I'm thinking of you doing productions of Merchant of Venice in London and Israel to foster discussions of anti-Semitism, something very problematic to do in Canada. Have you found theater an effective means to promote such discussions?
Only effective. I've never. I mean, it's problematic. Yes, that's okay. I think I'm not afraid of things being problematic. Every engagement, and maybe I'm lucky in this sense, but every engagement I've had has, in the moment, been joyful. Everything that you mentioned there, when the Merchant of Venice, in every instance there, the immediate engagement with it was nothing unproblematically joyful, overwhelmingly joyful, but it was a very, very complex experience, and others have been as well. And I think part of, I mean, in the making of everything that I do, I try and engage as broad a section of society as I can. So when I'm making work with young people, I often have young people in my rehearsal rooms with me, and they're not a passive presence. We have conversations about the work that we're making, and they influence the way I make the work. And if there are problematic things, then we explore that, not with a view to removing the difficulty, or maybe some of the hurt that moments in a work of art might create, because I'm sorry to say it, but that's life. I mean, that is the truth of things. Ultimately, you want to try and find ways of consoling or being compassionate about something, but that's not the same as removing the difficulty of things.
Yeah, I was just going to remark on how theater really does offer life lessons.
Yes.
Even through the process of theater.
Yeah.
It's very intriguing that you involve young people in the rehearsal space in that way.
Exactly. And I mean, let's face it, at the moment, I think it's fair to say that our lives are dominated by friction and anxiety around the friction that's surrounding us. I think what art does is what art can do, or theatre can do, is not remove that friction, but find ways of articulating ways through those frictions. Find, as it were, just to quote the title of this, harmonies out of that dissonance. The dissonance is important, though. We don't agree, and it's okay that we don't agree, and we might ultimately end up, both of us, as it were, or changing our views to come to an accommodation, different positions, and those are essential processes to engage in, and I would suggest, particularly as young people, to have them engaging in those difficult encounters. I think is key, isn't it? It's absolutely essential.
And did you want to ask the other question?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple more. This next one is from Desmond, and Desmond asks, is there anything in particular that you look for in the actors you work with? Are you drawn to actors with certain technical backgrounds, personal qualities, or artistic beliefs? Does it depend on the project, or is it a case-by-case basis in terms of casting for specific roles?
Thank you, Desmond. I mean, it can depend on the project. I mean, it can be that you're doing something where a certain set of skills are quite important. If you're doing something that's very physical, it might be that you require a certain craft, etc. But broadly, I think what excites me most about actors is when they surprise me in whatever way. I think I'm going to define this word in a second, but I think it's very, very important to cast the erotic in the actors, and by that I don't mean do they turn you on in a superficial sense. What I mean by that is that do they change the molecules in the air, as it were? Are you thrilled by the way their brain works? You might be challenged by that, but I think I don't mind feeling that I might not be able to, I don't know what this person might do. I think that's okay if I think they're coming out of an exciting place. I think it is important that the people you have in a room are compassionate, that they're in the room for the right reasons. And so I think the conversations I have with actors at the beginning, when I'm auditioning actors, I do try and set up a certain kind of, set of values around respect and not toleration, because I think that word's reductive. You don't tolerate other people. I think you're kind of reducing the complexity of them. But are you generous? Are you open-minded? Are you dominated by ideologies? Sorry, excuse me. So I think those sorts of the qualities that are to do with human engagement are quite important to me. But the specifics of them, how tall, how small, what their racial types, their religious beliefs are, all of that, I think I'm not influenced by any of that.
Are we ready? Okay, for the next question,
Yes.
it's from Jimmy, and Jimmy says this: there is a serious concern about cultural appropriation, that we can only tell our own stories, not present other people's stories. How would you respond to this?
That's a great question. So I know that there have been a number of times. I mean, I've got to say, I don't think that's been a major problem for theatre makers for most of theatre history. I think white middle class men have had, it's been completely unproblematic for them to tell whoever story that they wanted to tell. This has become more problematic in the last, say, 50 years, and that's great, I think. However, my qualification would be that to do with the fact that, I mean, I've encountered many times people saying to me, so for instance, I did a production of Arthur Miller's Broken Glass on the West End on tricycle, and it dramatizes a very specific experience in New York, Jewish man's experience in 1938 at a very specific time. And, you know, I was asked the question, how did I feel qualified to tell that story? And it always makes me feel like I want to respond by saying, but I'm not Elizabethan. And yet I do Shakespeare's plays. I think it is important that you acknowledge that, I mean, the different plays dramatize specific experiences in different ways. And I think it is important that in the conversations that you have, the people in the room, that there is an engagement with, as it were, the thing itself. So you know, if we're talking about, if it's a black story, maybe it's Pakistani Islamic. So I did Tartuffe recently, and I set it in Birmingham, modern day Birmingham, not in the Christian context of the original Molière play, but in the Islamic context of a community in Birmingham. And it was important to me that there were people in that room who could talk to that. But it was just as important to me that I had people in that room who could tell that story, but didn't need to be the thing itself. And I suppose why it's important to me is because theatre, I think, is one of the theatre and opera, I suppose, but it's synonymous. Are the platforms where we can still escape realism and naturalism. Film is is generally a very naturalistic form of storytelling, and you have to, you know, be careful to cast appropriately. But in theatre, you can have a black woman walk on stage with a young white boy, and he can call her mum, and she can call him her son. And within 5 minutes, I think less, I think, so long as the actors perform it with the degree of conviction, I think we accept it. And I think what's very important about that leap, that transcendence of the particular, is that it allows us to embrace. So our audiences are going to be populated by people with many different kinds of histories and legacies, and it allows all those different people into your story. It allows us to mine the human truths of big stories and not just the specific, although I completely appreciate that it is also important to honor specific experiences in certain contexts. Yeah, I suppose it goes back to what I said about what I feel ultimately privileges me to run a room as a director is that I at least care as much, if not more, than anyone else in that room about the thing that we're telling, and I hope that I will then do what everyone's doing in that room, whether they are the thing itself or not. I'll do the research, I'll listen, I'll learn, and I'll incorporate many truths to and make decisions based in knowledge and not ignorance, or not in complacency.
Yeah, I think complacency is where it's at, and I feel like theater has this immense amount of power, as you said, to take something that's not necessarily viewed as it is in reality, but still make it feel like it's potentially a normal thing, which I think is something very unique and true to theater. So yeah, certainly. Is there any other questions, Ange? I don't want to cut out.
Yeah, there is a couple more actually. The next question is from Alan. Alan says, there is a degree of polarization in Britain and in the US that cause many to fear the breakup of society. In this context, if you had an opportunity to direct any play you'd like, what would that be and why?
Oh, I always struggle with these such questions. But I will try and answer it. I promise, Alan. I suppose the thing I'd say is I think the sorts of polarizations we're hearing about now, or seeing or experiencing, I don't think they're new. I don't think they didn't exist before. I think they've always been there. I think things are being articulated with a certain kind of volume, and there's a kind of people have a platform in a way that they haven't had before. So I think it's louder. Unfortunately, it's more reductive than it has ever been before. But I think these voices have existed forever. I think what's wonderful is that I think we are hearing the ugly truths, and I think that's useful, because I think there's been a lot of silence around these things for a while now. So I'm not apocalyptic about these things. I think this is a very important opportunity, and I don't feel the need to silence the inconvenient utterance. Quite the opposite. I want to try and find a way to engage with that, and I think theatre does that. I mean, theatre is often, and most profoundly, it's a forum for different views. It's a way of enabling conversations between difference. Now, in that context, you're asking me brilliantly, what would I mean, there are many plays that I think deal with these sorts of things. I mean, I suppose one of the plays that I might be doing in the near future is Death and the Maiden, which is a play that is seeded in the trauma that's to do with historical torture and oppressive regimes, and the challenges of, and even the idea of what is free speech. As you know, there's a character in there who is a politician that wants to make a difference, but he knows he has to navigate many competing forces, and to be effective, he needs to compromise. And those are that's the DNA of where we're at, and where we're at all the time. So I think doing a play like that would be fantastic now. Yes.
Well, and I certainly have a plethora of Canadian plays at my disposal if you're ever interested. Just saying. Ange, what was the other question?
Yeah, so the next one is from Jane, and she says, you mentioned that you have a special preference for directing opera. What is it about opera that makes it special for you?
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. Okay, so many things, I think, but I suppose I love the fact that it's the embrace of so many different art forms. In a sense, if it's done well, at its best, it's the total art form. music, it's acting, it's words, it's and different kinds of music. It's singing and the instrumental elements as well. It's the poetic, it's the psychological. So all of those things. The reach of it, the scope of it, I find extraordinary. So that's one thing. So as a director, that's a great joy for me to sort of be engaging with all these different forms and the way that they interact with each other. Even more important than that, though, I think, is that I think the great thing about opera is that, because often opera is talked about as if it's a kind of index of the elite. It's the elite's art form, and then in a sense we need to educate the mass with its codes, and then they might be, prepared to engage in this extraordinary exalted art form. And I think about it in a completely opposite way, because I've seen it work, and I first engaged with it on a purely animal level. To share a space with somebody singing like that, with music that hits you like that, and with the drama that can often be sort of primary colored, but music that teases other parts of your brain and that are beyond immediate comprehension but have an emotional effect on you, I think is extraordinary. I mean, some of the most overwhelming emotional and psychic experiences I've had have been with opera, and that none of it was, it wasn't clever. It was animal. It was the limbic brain responding to these things. I think it's that, and I mean, like all of these things, I think the challenge with opera is that some of the performance history and performance traditions and maybe the performance vocabulary around it now are problematic. It's either very, very traditional and therefore alienating to young people who are educated to engage with drama in a different way, or it's highly conceptualized, and often conceived of in a way where you think the person who's been responsible for creating the production maybe didn't like the opera, that it's very ironic, the engagement with it, and so I think it's problematic, isn't it, at the moment, opera and the way it's shared. But when it's done well, it's the most primitive art form, I think, and I mean, primitive in a good sense, the most electrifying art form.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And do you, can we squeeze in one more, or should we be turning?
Yeah, there's no more questions at this point, so you can.
All right, well, maybe we'll turn it back then over to Jim to wrap things up. But before we do, I really want to thank you, Iqbal. That was a really interesting conversation. We went in a couple of different directions, but I think all valuable. So I really appreciate your time and your generosity and all the things that you do for the theater sector globally. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Truly. Okay.
Well, I'd like to join Robin, Iqbal, in thanking you for what I found to be a very stimulating discussion of so many issues. And I want to thank you, Robin, for your role in fostering that conversation, and the work you do in the Canadian theater community is greatly appreciated. I would just like to end this by reminding people this is the first in a series of talks like this, and I must say it's our great pleasure that the second of these talks is also going to involve Iqbal Khan. Yes, and this is going to be an event on Wednesday, October 28th, so 2 weeks from yesterday, and it's going to be at 3 o'clock Eastern time. Perhaps so we don't keep Iqbal up so late doing this. It's now, what is it? It's 10:30, almost 10:30 your time. And what we're focusing on, it picks up some of the themes of what we've been talking about today. It's entitled Shakespeare, a Playwright for Our Polarized Times. And we asked the question, is Shakespeare an icon to be toppled, as some in the academic community have argued that why are we listening to this 450-year-old white guy who writes in a language that most people don't quite understand? Or is Shakespeare a playwright whose work still matters? And so we're going to be having a conversation. It's going to be moderated by Carolyn Sale, who is a Shakespearean and a professor of English at the University of Alberta, on asking Iqbal about his views of what Shakespeare may contribute to the political challenges of the 21st century. So I hope you'll join us then. The information is about this coming one and our future events is on the Center for Free Expression website, which is cfe.ryerson.ca. So I want to thank all of you for coming, and I hope that we'll see many of you in 2 weeks to continue this discussion. And again, to Robin and Iqbal, thank you so very much for a wonderful and challenging and interesting discussion.
Thank you both. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.